So now over here in the main systems, this is where we're actually going to start putting those bits and pieces together to form the actual story, the actual interactive narrative, and how those different rules, those different arrows actually sends us to the different pages. So the first thing I want to do is go through and establish the pattern that this project is going to operate under. So the first thing we need to do is, if we've got a book, then we need to actually bind the individual pages. We need to fill out that data. So I'm going to have a method called bind book that will be called inside Start, whose responsibility is just building the individual pages. So a bunch of these pages all added together to make a book sounds an awful lot like an array, just a whole bunch of individual pages. So we're going to have a page array that is called book, that is interacted with throughout the rest of this entire program. In addition to that, I need a way to say the body information of this particular page. Now that we've found it, we need to render that to our screen, the screen.text variable we tracked earlier. So I'm going to have a method called render story that's going to actually render the body, the story, to the screen. And then I'm going to have another method that's responsible for handling input. So as I press different keys on my keyboard, if I'm at a specific location, going back to the Twine example, if I'm at a particular node and I have access to the hyperlinks there, when I click those hyperlinks, that sends me to another page. So the combination of where I'm currently sitting, what node I'm currently sitting at, and the combination of pressing any of those hyperlinks will send me somewhere. So we take those two bits of information into consideration to go somewhere else. Where are we? What button do we have access to, and was it pressed? Then we go somewhere else. So the first item is down here after update. I'm actually going to build those three methods. The first one is bind book. So you start out with void bind book parentheses and give it a body. After that, we need a method that's capable of rendering the story. So void render story parentheses curly brackets for the body. And then third and final, we need a method that's responsible for handling the input. So void handle input parentheses curly brackets for the body. Now I said that the book needs to be constructed of a bunch of individual pages. And to do that, I need to create an array. So way up here at the top where I have my text screen, I need to drop down to the next line and establish a page array called book, semicolon. So this book is what we're going to interface with throughout the rest of this program. Well, if you talk to an array that you've not actually allocated, that you've not filled in with information, you're going to have a bad time. You'll get some kind of an exception. There's simply no data. It might be a null reference exception. Might be an index out of range exception. Depends on how you try to access the object. So the idea here is we need to fill it in using bind book, but we actually need to call bind book so that it creates that link. So if start is called once, if update is called every frame by the engine itself, then I need to link my call, my method of bind book, I need to link a call to that inside start. So down here at the bottom of start, right after the screen text hello world, I can drop down a couple of lines and just say bind book. This is going to establish a jump point, a link from the bottom of start down into bind book. Now, to create bind book, we need to take those individual nodes that we saw over on the Twine project. pull in the information, the heading and the body for each one of those nodes, and build up the information that we're seeing here. Now, I'm going to write out a couple of these items, then I'm going to pause the video, fill in the rest of the items, and then come back and you'll see all of it filled out. You can pause the video at that point, go looking through, duplicate the text, but basically this is it's a just busy work kind of task. So we'll go through the first couple of items together, and you can go from there. So the first thing I need to do is actually allocate the book itself. So here inside bind book, we say the book itself equals a new page array. And now to fill in the individual pages, we need to give this array a body. So drop down to the next line, add a left opening curly. Visual Studio is going to add the right curly, and then hit enter, which will fiddle around with the formatting just a little bit. And then notice the red squiggly on line 46. That's because we're building up an initializer. We need to terminate that statement. So you can put your cursor on the right hand side of 46's closing curly and add a semicolon there to end that statement. Now, inside, between those two curlies, we're going to add the actual body text, the actual narrative text for all the different items. So to do that, this is going to be every one of those nodes. So if we jump back over to Twine for just a second, we'll see over here that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these individual nodes. So jumping back to the code, I want to have 8 of these items. So the first item, and actually all of the items, they're going to follow a very specific, a very similar pattern. So we can start out by saying new page parentheses. This is the constructor. New is invoking it. And notice right there, it says that the first argument it's expecting is the heading, and then the next argument right after that is the body. Now, this information is going to come over from those individual nodes. I'm going to fill that in just a second, but the pattern is pretty much the exact same regardless of the node's contents. So it's going to be a string. The heading of the node is going to be in there, and then we're going to have a comma, and then another string right after that, and that's going to be the body. To go on to the next node, the next new page, we throw a comma on the end and drop down a couple of lines and write the next new page, parenthesis, double quotes, etc. Now, to kind of help emphasize what page you're actually on, I'm going to go through and add just a little bit of kind of helper text. This is kind of a, in some books, you know how at the bottom or at the top, maybe it's got the title section that you're currently in, just as kind of a reminder to yourself. Here, I'm going to do essentially the same thing. The heading is not going to be affected by this, but the body is going to have a slight little hint to us as far as what heading we're actually in, because we don't actually see the heading when it's displayed to the screen. We only see the body. So it's useful to have a hint that this is the page you're actually on. It helps us kind of fix bugs and find issues and that kind of stuff. So to do that, right here inside the body section, I'm going to put inside those double quotes, I'm going to put a pair of parentheses, and inside the parentheses, I'm just going to hint to myself that this is, and I'm going to fill in what that heading is. So strictly informational to the end user so that they can see kind of what page they're on. Now, once we conclude that line, we actually want to drop down to finish writing the rest of the body. So to do that, I'm going to add a new line escape sequence. That \n will break us down onto the next line. Now you can optionally go in here and add 2 of those. So like this, have another new line, and that'll give you a space between those lines. So it's up to you whether or not you want to do 1 or 2. Perfectly fine to do either. And now I need the actual content. But before I start pasting in the content, I said I have 8 of these things. So I can go through, take this line, the whole thing, copy it, and now drop down a couple and paste this 7 more times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, there's a trick here. On the last item, you don't technically need that extra comma on there. So you can optionally get rid of it. But the second you try to add more pages on here, you have to remember to add it. Otherwise, just for example, if I break the line right above it, you'll notice you suddenly get a red squiggly. This is a compiler error telling you that it expected a comma. So you can leave it on there, or you can remember to add it later. Just realize that that's what you kind of have to do. So I'm going to get rid of my 8 comment up here at the top. And now all of my individual nodes, I'm going to go over to Twine, and I'm going to pull the information from each one of these nodes. Now again, all I have to do is double click it, and I see the heading at the top. So I'm going to grab that text, Control C, and jump back to my code. And now right here in the first heading, I'm going to paste that in. But the thing is, when I paste in this information, later on I'm going to be doing some string comparisons. I'm going to be doing some string assignments and that kind of stuff. And it's very easy to accidentally mix up the case. A capital W and a lowercase w are 2 completely different characters in the system. So to eliminate confusion on that front, I'm going to make a rule for myself. Everywhere where I do a string related thing, if I'm talking to a heading where I'm doing some kind of comparison, I'm going to use lowercase across the board. So even though this came in as capital W, capital U, I'm going to drop that down to lowercase w, lowercase u. And now I'm going to go back to the Twine file, and I want to pull in the body text right here. So select all that stuff, copy, jump back to my code, and now I'm going to paste that in right after the new line escape sequence, but before the double quote. So now that I have all this text, I need to make a couple of adjustments. So the first thing is I want to update this hint text to myself. So instead of using those 3 question marks that we had a second ago, I want to just mirror the heading that we saw over here. So this is wake up. And now the second part of this, and by the way, for those of you who might be running off the screen or trying to figure out how to bring your text back around, there's a couple of different options. One is if you just put your cursor somewhere in your existing string, if you press enter, Visual Studio will understand and break the string in 2. So here, hitting enter, it stopped the current string, it added a plus, and then it dropped down to the next line and added a starting string right here. Now, of course, the formatting is a little wacky, so you can tab it back over to kind of line it up, something like that. We'll just pull it. We'll pull it in one tab to make sure that this this visual alignment is good. But the other option here is, notice there's a little tiny like teal kind of hooking arrow right there. That is, if you go up here to Edit, Advanced, and down here at the bottom there's Word Wrap. So it will word wrap your text just like, you know, any other text editor will do. Now, for those of you curious about those little blue arrows or the little blue dots that indicate the white space, the arrows are tabs, the dots are spaces. That's the View White Space button right there, and they're enabled by that blue box right there. So you can enable those two to see the extra formatting and functionality. Now, it's important to realize that even though I put my cursor there and I hit enter, this quote plus quote does not actually add a new line like what you're seeing there. So if I wanted to actually break this string into multiple lines when it gets rendered to my screen, I would need to manually put in a new line either somewhere right around here or right here at the beginning of this A, but after the double quote, so that I get that formatting just like we have new line sitting right here, the \n. So just a couple of things to kind of remind yourself of. But now that we've got the page with its heading and its body with that little heading hint right there, I now need to reflect the information over to my player. They need to know that they can do something here to check out the car. They can do something here to check out the farmhouse. So the option that I want to give them is one of these letters is actually going to mean something special. Now, the idea here is that C is going to be the special character for the car. F is going to be the special character for the farmhouse. So instead of using these double square brackets that we saw that was specific to Twine, I'm going to get rid of those on both sides, and I'm going to wrap the C in a single set of those square brackets. I'm going to do the same thing over here with check the farmhouse. I'm going to get rid of those. And just add a left and right around that F. That way, when the player sees it, the C key and the F key kind of stand out. That way they see, oh, well, what happens if I press the C key on my keyboard? And it should do something. I press the F key, it should do something. So at this point, I'm going to pause the video, jump back over to Twine. I'm going to pull all those 7 remaining nodes over, fill in the headings, change the case so that they're all lowercase. I'm going to update the bodies and also update the information inside the question marks and update the individual keys that we can press. And I'll call that out once we return. So at this point, I'm pausing and I'll be right back. Welcome back. At this point, you should either go through and copy all the information over from your Twine, or you can write shorter versions. In this case, this is a lot of text. There was a lot of like little cleanup spots, double spaces, and some missing spaces between, you know, a period and the next sentence, that kind of stuff that you could adjust, and that kind of stuff. But you can also just shorten it. So in this case, like wake up could be do you check the car or do you check the farmhouse? So something fairly straightforward. Now again, we give you the documentation, the narrative itself for both the Curiouser and Curiouser and the Desert Escape. So you should be able to just copy paste in those blocks of text and everything should just be fine. There shouldn't really be any additional formatting or adjustments that you need to make on your end. So in this case, we have all 8 pages. The nodes heading for each one comes through wake up, check the car, break the window, find a highway, check the farmhouse, enter the farmhouse, try the phone, and inspect the basement. Then there's the body for each of these items where it says this is, and again, reminder text to ourselves where we're currently at. Then we have the whole body for the item. Now going back up here to the first entry, you'll see from wake up, if I press C, I check out the car. Or if I press F, I check the farmhouse. From check the car, if I press B, I break the window. If I press F, I check the farmhouse. Going down to break the window, if I press F, I check the farmhouse. Or I can press H and I try to find a highway. If I find a highway, that's actually a win scenario. I've left the game and everything is perfectly fine. Maybe then I want to ask the player if they want to play again or something like that, which would be another page. Do you want to play again? Yes, no, that kind of deal. Then it could send you somewhere in this story. The next item is check the farmhouse. And if I press the C key, I check out the car. If I press the F key again, I actually enter the farmhouse. So from check to enter, based on the same key press, F, being pressed a second time. If I enter the farmhouse, then down here I could press P to try the phone, or I could press B to inspect the basement. Then, if I try the phone, I could press B to go and inspect the basement, or I could leave the farmhouse and try to find a highway by pressing the F key. And if I make the mistake of inspecting the basement, then that's the lose scenario and I've lost this game because apparently I don't watch horror movies. So there's the whole story and how those different items link together. Now if you're curious like what each one of those P, B, H, the different keys, what those actually mean, well, all that's doing is saying from whatever node this is, these are the buttons you can press. These are the links to other nodes that you can go to. So for example, break the window has check the farmhouse or find a highway. So if we jump back to the Twine, and you see over here, break the window, that was the node we were just talking about, there's an arrow coming up and over if I press the F key, so I can check out the farmhouse, or from break window, if I press H, I can come down to find a highway. So those key presses represent these arrows linking these nodes together. So from this one location, I have 2 possible destinations I can go to based on 2 different key presses. So when you're trying to figure out what key presses and what nodes go to what other nodes, this is the information that you would cross-reference. So where am I currently? What's my current heading, this thing right here, and then what can my next heading be? It can be either this one or this one based on those 2 arrows. And, well, what would it be? It would be either check the car based on pressing maybe, what is this, the C key, and then I could go to check the farmhouse based on pressing the F key. So that's what those arrows would represent in our version. So at this point, now it would be nice if I could actually see these different nodes, see what those bodies are actually shown to me on screen. So the first thing I'm going to do is jump over to Unity and make sure that all the code that I just wrote actually compiles. Because if I accidentally left off a semicolon somewhere, or a comma somewhere, or a parenthesis, or something like that, those issues would usually pop up in the console. So we jump back over to Unity and let that compile. And when it finishes, hopefully there's nothing wrong there. But if there is, we could stop and address it. So in this case, a single warning popped up, and it's saying that it's inside my last name, first name, week 2 file. So let's take a look at this real quick. This is the general warning. This is like a summary up here at the top. This section down at the bottom is additional details. So I can look and see what's actually going on. So inside assets, inside this folder, inside this folder, inside this file, at line 9, column and row, that kind of deal, it was this warning, and it says the private field Reynolds Tony _ week 2 project.book. So that's the class, the first little bit right there, last name, first name _ week 2 project. That's the class that this error was generated from, or this warning was generated from. It's a warning symbol. And then it talks about .book. So book is the variable in question. So it's saying that the private field, the global variable, is assigned, but its value is never used. Well, that's actually correct for this particular code at this moment. If we double click this warning, we get sent to the line in question. And at this point, it's telling me line number 9, this book variable that lives inside this class, it's not yet used. It's assigned, but it's never actually used. And if you follow the code, book, you can actually look at it, click it once to kind of highlight it. It shows you green, that's the original. And then blue is all the references. So in this case, there's actually only one throughout this entire file that talks to book. And this is an assignment. Elsewhere, throughout the rest of the file, this thing is not used at all. And that's perfectly fine. That's all that warning means. So we're going to continue building this, this file. And when we write code that does use book, that warning will go away. So at this point, I want to start building out render story so that it can actually show me which page that I'm currently on. That way, when I start building up the handle input stuff, when I start building out those arrows, it will actually make sense as far as what we're seeing on screen. So we will start constructing render story and the items that allow us to control that in the next video.